Today, we're jumping into one of the most important stories in the book of Acts. Seriously, it's a game changer. It's all about how a terrible crisis in Jerusalem actually ends up sparking a global movement in this bustling, wild, multicultural city called Antioch. Let's get into it. So, this is really the big question driving the whole story, right? How does something awful, a crisis, end up creating a massive opportunity? We're about to see how persecution, which was meant to crush this new faith, actually became the very thing that pushed it out into the world. Okay, so let's set the scene. The early church, it's pretty much all centered in Jerusalem. But then a leader named Stephen is martyred, and this kicks off a huge wave of persecution. Believers literally have to run for their lives. But what looked like the end was actually a new beginning, because that forced migration, it turned into a mission. You can just see the dominoes fall here. It all starts with tragedy, Stephen's death in Jerusalem. That leads to the scattering, where believers flee, heading out to places like Phoenicia, Cyprus, and eventually Antioch. Now, Antioch was a massive deal, the third largest city in the entire Roman Empire. And as this refugee community forms, they bring their faith with them. And this, right here, is the breakthrough moment. At first, most of these scattered believers, they stuck to what they knew. They only shared their message with other Jews. But in Antioch, a few of them did something totally revolutionary. They started talking to the Hellenists, the Greek-speaking non-Jewish population. You cannot overstate what a massive deal this was. So who were these trailblazers? You might think it was the famous apostles sent from headquarters in Jerusalem, right? Nope, not even close. This was a completely spontaneous grassroots movement, started by some people the story doesn't even bother to name. That's right, 0. The Bible doesn't give us a single name of the people who kicked off this whole global mission. It just calls them men from Cyprus and Cyrene. These were just regular folks, ordinary believers who made the choice to step way outside their cultural comfort zone. It's just an incredible reminder that world-changing moments are often started by people whose names we'll never know. So how did this unofficial mission go over? Well, the results were absolutely explosive. The text says the hand of the Lord was with them, which is basically code for saying that God's power and approval were all over this. It's this flashing green light showing that God was completely behind this new, inclusive approach. And the growth was just immediate. Well, as you can imagine, news of this massive revival in Antioch eventually gets back to the leadership in Jerusalem. And they're probably a little stunned, so they decide to send someone to check things out. And the guy they picked? He could not have been more perfect for the job. His name is Barnabas, and it literally means son of encouragement. And wow, did he live up to that name. He's described as a good man, just full of the Holy Spirit and faith. He's not coming in like an auditor to shut things down. He's a bridge builder. His whole character was exactly what this new, exciting, but probably fragile community needed. So Barnabas shows up and he follows this brilliant 4-step process. First, he's there to assess the situation. He could have seen chaos. He could have seen a bunch of rule breakers. But instead, what he sees is the grace of God all over the place. So what does he do? He encourages them. He cheers them on. And this act of nurturing what God was already doing just poured fuel on the fire, and the community grew even more. It is a masterclass in leadership. Now, Barnabas is also wise enough to know that this thing is getting way too big for him to handle alone. This city is huge, there are tons of new believers, and they all need guidance and teaching. He knows he needs help. He needs a partner. So he makes this incredibly shrewd, strategic move. He leaves Antioch and travels about 100 miles to Tarsus, specifically to find a guy named Saul, who we all know today as the Apostle Paul. At this point, Saul was kind of off the radar, but Barnabas remembered something crucial. Saul had a specific calling to the non-Jewish world. This is amazing. Barnabas wasn't threatened by Saul's talent. He was a talent spotter for God's team. And check this out. They didn't just pop in for a visit. Barnabas and Saul invested an entire year in Antioch, a whole year of just meeting with the church and teaching them. That kind of long-term investment was absolutely crucial. It's what built a strong, stable community and really grounded these new believers in their faith. So with this brand new mixed community of Jews and Gentiles and this incredible new leadership team, something else happens in Antioch. The movement gets a name. A name that, well, you've definitely heard before. Yep. It was right here in Antioch that the followers of Jesus were first called Christians. Now, the name was probably started by outsiders as a way to describe this group that was obviously not just another part of Judaism. But what might have started as a label or even a nickname became a badge of honor. It defined their new global identity, centered on one person, Christ. You can really see the massive shift happening here. The whole center of gravity for the faith moves. What started in Jerusalem as a primarily Jewish movement was now launching out of Antioch, a multi-ethnic, mission-sending hub full of people who were now being called Christians. Antioch had officially become the new launchpad for taking the message to the world. So, why does a 2,000-year-old story about a city in ancient Syria matter to us? Because the legacy of what happened there, the principles that were at work, they're absolutely timeless. So what can we take away? Well, here are 4 big ones. First, be like those unnamed heroes. Be willing to step across a cultural line and share your story. Second, be a Barnabas. Be an encourager who looks for God's grace in other people and points it out. Third, find a partner. Building community isn't a solo sport. And finally, live up to the name Christian. Live it in a way that is so compelling that other people can't help but notice. And that really brings us to the final question for you to think about. The story of Antioch shows us that when ordinary people act with spirit-led courage, and they're supported by wise encouragement, they can literally change the world. So what's the Antioch moment? That unexpected, groundbreaking opportunity that's waiting to happen right in your community?